All right, so moving forward here, let's go into our terrain mountain. I want to make sure that we're enabling our displacement. So under terrain, let's select enable texture displacement to bring that back. And now let's just finally go into our fireball and let's hook this up to our cache. And in our cache, I want to make sure to select load from file. Instead of missing frame, I want to select no geometry, because this would make Mantra hang and then it would just kind of just sit there forever. So even though we got nothing on the frame 30, it's not going to error out. All right, so now let's just maybe go to a frame that we have everything included. And we're going to hook up our fireball, load this back in. There it is. Let's turn on our volume light. And you can see it's attached to our fireball import, which is our geometry, and our pyro shader here. And it's grayed out because we need to enable the shader again. And that's hooked up to the right shader. Okay. So the last thing I want to do is I just want to, since the volcano is quite big and there's a lot of heat going on, I'm just going to increase the intensity of the volume light to 3. That's just going to make the fire scatter a lot further and make it a lot brighter of a scatter. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go to our render view. We're going to select our camera. And just in our mattress settings, I just want to make sure that we're not rendering anything with too much depth. Maybe I want to turn the reflect and refract limit to 6 and 6. And everything for now, I'm going to keep just as default. So that's pretty good. Let's just make sure I'm going to render in 720p. And all right, so with that in mind, let's just take a render. All right, so everything's loaded up, and it actually took quite a while to load up this displaced geometry. But, you know, it is what it is. But I can instantly see that everything's working, and I might just go to a later frame so I can see more of the explosion. And one other thing, I want to just rotate our HDR image just down a little bit so we don't see any of that black. So I'm going to go to the skylight, and we can still save this. I'm going to rotate the Z-axis down by 3.5. And you can see now we just rotated that image down, so now we can't see any of that. All right, so everything's kind of working, and it's going to take a while. You know, we can't get too picky. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and my final render, if we just kind of pause this and go to our final render is right here, and this took about 30 minutes a frame at a fairly low resolution. But you can see everything's working. It looks pretty great, but we've got a lot of pixelation, and it's 720p. So it's a bit of a balance, but I know that with our redshift render, we're going to be able to get all the nice details and HD resolution. So I'm just going to go forward to, say, frame 130. And let's just take one render of everything. Let's add in some render layers. Before we set this off for a batch render. So let's go to our output. And in our mantra, we're not going to go too in depth here, but our final pixel samples that I've found for about 30 minutes a frame at 720 resolution will be 8 and 8. And I'm also going to drop the noise level to 0.1. I'm going to keep everything else at default. And mainly under our extra image planes, let's add in some image planes here. So I'm going to keep it really simple again. We're going to have our diffuse, reflect. We're not using the coat, so I'm going to delete that. And SSS, we delete that. So I'm going to use a combined lighting. So we're going to get all these passes with all our combined lighting. And also I want to add 2 simple image planes, one for our fire and one for our smoke. So if you go into the Pyro shader, you'll notice that in all the Pyro shader, under exports, it's automatically exporting these two mask layers. So we can pull that up from our in compositing to have control over the fire and the smoke. So under that, I'm just going to type in smoke mask, and that's automatically going to read in that information into a separate image plane. So that's pretty great. And then here, we're going to choose fire mask. Oops, not in there, in the next image plane. Let's copy this and paste this. So that's all I'm going to do. So I've added in a smoke pass, a fire pass, and we're already going to get a volume pass for all our volumes with the combined lighting, then as well as diffuse, reflect, and refract. So that should be enough to color correct the ocean and the mountain, and then we've got all our volume information separately. All right, so let's go back into our render view, and now let's take another render. All right, so after we let this render here, we can kind of double check our passes and make sure they're working. So if we just go up and to our bar here, and if it's hidden, you just select this little arrow, and now we can view all our different render passes. So we can see how this is going to work out. You know, we've got the diffuse information even all the way down to our waves. So we can pull that information back in compositing if we want. And then we've got our reflections, refractions, which there isn't much in there, all of our volumes together, and our smoke mask and everything without the fire. And then we've got our fire mask here, which will control everything that's got emissive light in the fluid as well. So there we have it. We've got all of our render passes all set up. So now if we were to set this off for a final render, let's go to our output picture, output it into a volcano render folder, and when you're ready, we'll save it up and we'll select render to disk and background. And since I've already rendered this, let's just take a look at this in Nuke. And we're going to go over a little bit more of the compositing when we get into the redshift stuff. But essentially, here's the raw beauty render of our volcano here. That looks pretty good. And so finally, let's get into the redshift chapter, and we'll set all of our scene up and render this in redshift.